Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. This is episode 94 of my podcast for July 21st, 2010. My guest today is a returning guest. He is Bob Miller. He is the Executive Director of the Shingo Prize for Operational Excellence at the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. In the podcast today, Bob and I talk as a follow-up to my interview with Dr. Stephen Covey, which you can hear by going to leanblog.org/91. Bob talks in more detail about how Dr. Covey became involved with the Shingo Prize and what some of the hopes are for his future participation, both as a professor at the Huntsman School and ongoing participation with the Shingo Prize. So, as always, I want to thank you for listening. It's good to talk to you again, Bob.
Thanks, Mark. I'm glad to be able to be here with you.
And we're talking to follow up last week's, as we were recording this, last week's Shingo Prize conference, which I participated in, and it was a very exciting conference. And people may have heard of the involvement of Dr. Stephen Covey, both in the Shingo Prize and with the John Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. And I was so fortunate to talk with Dr. Covey back in podcast 91. And so now, Bob, it's a chance for us to chat and hear your perspective on Dr. Covey getting involved with Utah State, with the Shingo Prize, what some of the background and your views are on that.
Oh, thank you. I love to talk about this because I've learned so much from Dr. Covey over many years and been privileged in the past 12 months to have really had an opportunity to get to know him quite well. And I would love to share with your listeners a little bit of the story about how he became interested in us and how that sort of spilled over into our understanding of how to approach operational excellence. So we've been inviting Dr. Covey for years and years to speak at our conference, but he is really hard to get to make a commitment because he charges so much money for his speeches, and without some kind of a relationship or a contact, it just wasn't happening. And so last year, in preparation for our conference in Nashville, we contacted him again, and through some, I almost think of as divine providence, through some miracle, the people who manage his schedule said, well, if we can find some other reason for him to be at or near Nashville, Tennessee on the day before or the day after your conference, we'll be happy to have him speak. Otherwise, he may be able to do some kind of a video connection for a few minutes. So we started, trying to think of everything we could think of, find some company who'd be willing to pay, the money required to get him to come. And out of the blue, about 10 days before the conference, a large company in Knoxville, Tennessee had a cancellation of a speaker at a major conference, and they called him and asked him if he would come. And of course he accepted, called us and said, we'd like to be there. Is the invitation still open? So, it couldn't have been more perfect. So he came to our conference and spent an evening with us, was our keynote speaker last year, and it was just enough exposure on his part to our work and our principles of operational excellence and our model that he was very interested. So a week after the conference was over with, we got a call from his office and said, Dr. Covey would like to meet with you. Would you be willing to come up and spend some time with him to talk about the Shingo Prize? So, of course, we dropped everything we had and went up to his office, and he was very kind to spend several hours with us. And it was almost like a match made in heaven from the very beginning. His focus, Dr. Covey's focus, is for his entire life has been dedicated to building principle-centered individuals, to really helping leaders become better leaders by taking correct principles, and of course he would say all of the principles that are connected with the 7 habits are the core of his life's work, He certainly added a lot of work to that over the years, but those principles that are connected with the 7 habits, and his purpose has been to get those inside of people. And then when they're deep inside of them, then they come out in their behaviors as principle-centered leaders. So in our work, we have been thinking about the principles of operational excellence and wanting to make sure the Shingo Prize was creating principle-centered organizations. When he described his work and his process, it occurred to us that we're trying to do exactly the same thing. Him on a personal level and us on an organizational level. And so it just, the way in which he was accomplishing it and the importance with which he placed on it was exactly the same way in which we were approaching building organizations. Because just like leaders, in order to be a sustainable leader, that really is transformational in the places where he or she works, it has to be more than just superficial. And the same thing with implementing lean. It has to be more than superficial. It can't just be, using a few tools or having a program or, 1 or 2 people who are trying to, make something happen. It has to be deep inside of the organization, just like the principles of life have to be deep inside of a leader. So that's really what gave us the inspiration about saying, you know what, we're really building a culture based on principles of operational excellence. And then from there we were able to just link in all of our work on systems that are aligned with principles and tools that are enabling the system, and the result of all of that helping to achieve results. And then, of course, in our model we talk about how the results affirm the correctness of the principles. So,
and for people who might not have seen what you're referring to is the Shingo Prize model and illustration. I mean, people can find that pretty easily if they go to shingoprize.org and see that model that's built upon those levels you're talking about, right?
Right, exactly right. Yeah, so in the center of all of that is culture. And so when he talks about, Dr. Covey often talks about inside out, and inside out refers to what I just described of a leader. And when you're trying to drive the culture of an organization, what we learn from him is sort of the converse. We've said it works when you're working one at a time to transform, it works to get the principles inside of one person, then they come out. But most leaders of organizations are trying to influence and align hundreds, if not thousands, of workers and employees, all with different backgrounds, different cultures. So we talk about that as outside in, the process for that. So it's outside in, meaning it's the alignment and the execution every day of systems that reinforce the principles using good tools. That's the outside influence that people experience when they come to work every day. And when you experience it enough over a long enough period of time, it changes your attitudes, and your attitudes influence behaviors, and your behaviors define the culture. So right. It's a way to create a sustainable transformation around lean. And we were really happy this year in his teaching. He used our model extensively in his speaking, and he kept coming back to it from his own work, and that was very reassuring and very affirming right. of the correctness of where we're going with it.
So in the interim between Nashville in 2009 and the Salt Lake City conference here in 2010, for people who saw the preview videos before this year's conference, Dr. Covey had a featured role, and he was certainly featured quite prominently within the conference in terms of his talk, his keynote, his events, participating in handing out the Shingo Prize medallions and prize. So what can you tell us a little bit about what transpired and his role with the business school at Utah State?
Well, yes, Dr. Covey, we began engaging the Shingo Prize staff with he and his staff, trying to understand better the points of synergy between his work and our work, and look for ways that we could complement and support each other as we went forward, both with research and with communications and networks. And during the course of doing all of that, he became, we introduced him to the dean of the business school, the John Huntsman School of Business, and it turns out that Dr. Covey is a very close personal friend with John Huntsman. And so we got them talking with each other about the business school and about their collective commitment to the business school. And one thing led to another, and there was an invitation, or I guess you would call it an invitation, to for Dr. Covey to become the first holder of the John Huntsman Presidential Chair in Leadership at the Huntsman School of Business. And he was honored to accept that. So now Dr. Covey is a full tenured professor at Utah State University holding this honorary chair, and is committed in a very significant way to the success of the business school. And that, of course, just adds value to our work with him through the Shingo Prize. So that was a very significant thing, and we're very proud to have him associated with with Utah State University in that capacity. So it's deepened his commitment to us. His team worked very closely with us to make sure that they were all, what he said at our conference this year was in perfect harmony with our message. And it's so interesting. What Dr. Covey normally does when he speaks is he doesn't really have the time to spend much more than just the actual presentation when we travel someplace. Right. In this case, he spent 4 hours the evening before he spoke. He came back the next morning, made the keynote presentation, had a luncheon with a group of key people who wanted to spend some private time with him, and then he came back and participated in a reception that we had for the recipient companies and their employees. And then he wanted very much to be a part of the award ceremony. And, of course, we were honored, and we knew people would be honored to shake his hand and take their pictures with him. And so he really devoted a day and a half of his time to be with us. And, boy, it was really a boost and a privilege for people who get to be around him. You experienced it, Mark. It's just it's an uplifting experience when he looks you in the eye and talks to you, because you feel his personal connection with you, even though he may not know you from anybody else.
Yeah, you're right. I felt that very strongly when I was chatting with him. As some people would say, he seemed very present. That he's looking in the eye, and that you were, he was talking to you, and you were the most important person to him right then at that moment. And that was very neat.
I think it's those attributes that enable him to meet with presidents of countries all over the world. We were talking with some people who run the Shingo Prize down in Mexico, and and they were discussing with him the possibility of someday him coming down to Mexico to share his message with our conference down there. And his response was, "Oh, well, I really need to get down to see President, is it Calderon?
Yeah.
Calderon. Yeah. And he said, "Oh, I really need to get down to spend some time with him. Could you coordinate it with my trip?"
Yeah.
And I think that's just the kind of impact that the man has around the world.
Yeah. And so, well, one other thing I was going to say, he was there talking about setting an example of continuous learning. He, I know, sat in on Ritsuo Shingo's keynote. And so, he was there not just for...
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, and he has great respect for Mr. Shingo, and so he is continuously learning, and he made a personal contact with lots of people who I know felt edified because of having spent a few minutes with him. So it was great. We were really, really pleased to have an affiliation with him, and for the insight that we gained from him. He does offer current insights about our work, but perhaps more important than anything, it's pointed us towards his life work and the body of knowledge that's represented in his thinking that's really caused us to, I think, have new insights about how to create sustainable cultural transformation around lean.
And so now, Dr. Covey is involved, and I assume will continue to be involved with the Shingo Prize. I thought we could shift conversation a little bit to talk about, the philosophical connections and alignment between, principle-focused leadership, 7 habits, and I guess including the 8th habit, and maybe some of the experiences. I know you and I have both talked to people whose companies have used management training based around Dr. Covey's principles in conjunction with lean. So I was wondering if you could share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how many people, both in the military and in the private sector, and I would say almost particularly in the military, when I'm at a base or a depot, they'll open up their drawer and they'll pull out their stack of little cards and they'll say, "Oh yeah, this is the stuff that guides our philosophy and our thinking, and here's our leadership creed, and it comes from Dr. Covey." And they've all taken classes, and corporations through multiple generations of leaders continue to teach and reinforce Dr. Covey's basic principle-centered leadership work. And it really is impactful. It really is impactful. People, I think what does it, what makes it so, is because he's focusing on principles. And when you focus on principles, people identify with him because, as he uses the words, a principle is universal, timeless, and self-evident. And there aren't very many things in life that you can talk with people about that are universally understood and that are timeless and that are inarguable because they're self-evident. So when you talk about correct principles that govern, human behavior or cultural transformation or operational excellence, they're really powerful and people connect with them and they're transformed. It's like, how many people do you know, Mark, and I know, and probably many of your listeners do as well, who've experienced this for themselves? When you get involved in this work, it becomes personally transformational. It's not just work. It becomes part of who you are, and you take it home with you, and it becomes part of your life. And I think it's because we're connecting with universal principles that are true, that really drive the way we think. And when we think about that, if we're trying to create sustainable improvement in companies, what better way to do it than to focus around the things that become transformational in people's lives? For them to take their work home with them, and incorporate these principles of operational excellence into their personal lives. Yeah. And you couldn't ask for a better cultural embeddedness. And so I think that's why people connect with Dr. Covey. I think that's why everywhere we go with this message that is connected and touches his message, people resonate with it. And they say, that feels right. It just feels right to them. And they know that continuing to go down the tool-oriented, the programmatic orientation that they've done for years, they know that it doesn't work. They know from their own experience, they know in their own hearts that it's not the way to create sustainable change. And so we really feel like the work that we're doing is so important, and we're anxious to touch as many corporations and individuals as we can with this message.
Well, and there will be future opportunities to do so. Looking ahead to next year's conference, it's actually less than 12 months away. There's a big change than the usual timeline, right, for 2011?
Yeah, so we will no doubt continue our relationship with him. I just wrote a thank you note to him today, and as I expressed my appreciation to him, I realized how much I've been impacted by my brief affiliation with him personally. And so we look forward to next year. I think probably, we won't be as fortunate next year to get as much of his time as we did this year. This was a gift that we will probably always appreciate and never be able to replicate. But I'm sure that he's going to continue to want to have some kind of a role in our organization going forward, and of course we'll be honored to do that.
Yeah, and looking ahead to 2011, next year's conference will be in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, in March, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the end of March. We moved it back this year into May because we wanted to do it when our university was finished, and since the conference was right just 60 miles from our university, we wanted our faculty and staff to be able to participate in the conference as well. And the semester ended the week before the conference began. When we're away from here, it has less of an impact, and we also, by moving it into May when we did this year, we ran up against the American Society for Quality ASQ conference, and there's many people from ASQ who are members there who would like to be able to participate in our conference, and they were just too close to each other to be able to do that. So moving it forward a little bit in the year will enable their participation as well.
Well, that's good. And it was a real pleasure to have more of the students around. Really bright bunch, and a couple of times that I've spoken to them via the internet and their Lean Leaders Club, and been on campus for the Partners in Business Operational Excellence event. I've always been impressed with the Utah State students. Always very enjoyable group to be around.
Well, thank you, Mark. We really are blessed to be affiliated with a university. There's something about the environment of a university, the mission of a university, the spirit of young people that are so eager to learn, and that really makes it a great place to work. And we really value having them as sort of members of our staff, mostly volunteer members of our staff, eager to get experience that helps them to understand the context for their work a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay, and well, I want to thank you, Bob, for sharing some of the background and story and perspectives there on the Shingo Prize and Dr. Covey. Maybe one final thing, if you can share, for people, organizations that are interested in the Shingo Prize process, what's the best way for them to learn more, would you say? Well,
if you go to shingoprize.org, there's a drop down where I think it's in the About Us category that says Model and Guidelines. Click the Model and Guidelines, and there's two pieces to that. The first half is the model itself that describes the principles and the transformational process, which is the principles, systems, and tools model. And then the second half of it is the actual guideline itself, which describes how to make application, how to create an achievement report, what the criteria will be for the assessment, how the assessment team does their work, and it's all very clearly communicated in there. But it's on the website under Model and Guidelines. It's the Guidelines section.
Okay, great. So again, I want to thank my guest today, Bob Miller, Executive Director of the Shingo Prize for Operational Excellence. Thanks for taking time out to talk today.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.